So this is a continuation of the series that I just started regarding travel and work abroad. I'm mostly speaking to Americans or people who are from English speaking first countries, with the exception of South Africa. Sorry, no disrespect, but when you are in the job market, typically you will receive a lower just because of where you are from, the type of English that is used there, and so on. Anyways, as I mentioned before in the intro video, one of the key things to focus on is negotiating. But before you negotiate, you need to take some things into consideration. That way, you know where to emphasize your negotiations, where you should take a step back or just accept it because, that is the standard for that country, for that type of employment, and so on. So, there are typically three pay scales. For anybody who wants to argue with me or debate me about this, that's fine. You can do so in the comments. I'm more than willing to reply or clarify things if I wasn't clear enough in the video. But ideally, especially for Americans, they think that the rule of law applies everywhere and that equality and all this other stuff. But the reality of the situation is most positions abroad, especially for expats, do not have equal pay. And the ones that do have equal pay are literally the most difficult to get because of how competitive it is. For example, if there is a position that is offering equal pay scale, right? It doesn't matter if it's engineering or in education or whatever. What ends up happening is you have not just Americans and Canadians and Europeans and so on competing for it. You have people from all over the world, people who may have a higher education or more work experience than you. And obviously, those people want those positions. I do because in a normal market, they don't get paid as much. So when a position is open where it is offering equal pay scale, it becomes extremely competitive. I can give you an example. I went to a international school services job fair, and some of the schools will publish what their pay scale is, and some won't. Typically, the ones that won't is because they're not offering equal pay scale. The ones that were offering equal pay scale, the line was, and the applicants were above 1,000 per position because you can also track it online to see how many people are applying and the likelihood of you actually getting the job. And that's the other thing. The criteria to get the position becomes higher. There was a position I was applying for that initially was willing to hire somebody who had at least 5 years of teaching experience. And as long as they had a bachelor's degree in education, that was sufficient. But because of so many applicants and because they didn't want to have to go through the trouble of interviewing everyone, they ended up increasing it to at least 10 years of work experience and at least a master's degree related to education. So that's kind of where the job market is. Now, I'm using my field as an example because I have the most experience in that. But I've spoken to people in other fields, and it is the same issue. As more people are in the market longer and the salaries are more competitive, they are taking advantage of the situation. Additionally, you have the other side where people aren't, or companies aren't publishing what their pay scales are. And honestly, a lot of it depends on where you're from. That's the pay scale. So, in that sense, there are two pay scales. Tier one, tier two. And the difference is about a third. Uh, Same responsibilities, same background, experience, everything, same requirements, same everything at the end of the day. But the tier one countries' passports will receive about a third higher salary. Now, that goes into a lot of different factors. One, which is the likelihood of them being able to get somebody from one of those countries, especially for that position, especially for that much experience and that type of work ethic, right? kind of requires them to do that. The other part is the cost of living in that base country. Well, how are you supposed to convince somebody to come and take a job that is paying, for example, the equivalent of $2,000, right? When they can make 3, 4,000 in their home country, especially if it's a high stress type of position. While somebody who is from a country where the average income is $1,000, while offering $2,000 is actually going overboard. Now, that's always a plus as an employee. You want that, but the reality is that rarely ever happens. And as more and more companies have been willing to forego higher quality employees in place of larger numbers, well, the market's kind of getting flooded at the moment, especially with everything else that's going on. So let's move on. All right, salaries. The easiest is it's comparable to to your place of origin. So this should be a given, and I think most people who have lived or work abroad already know this. Um, but for somebody who maybe doesn't have this background, always compare it to where you are coming from. So how much can you save without dropping your standard of living? That's one way to compare it. If you are used to renting an apartment that is furnished or having a house that is furnished, then your rent should reflect that. Where you live should reflect that. The neighborhood you live in should reflect that. So I'm going to give you an example. So in the US, if you are accustomed to making $5,000 a month and being capable of saving 20% of that, that's $1,000 a month. While if you, as an expat, are working in Malaysia and you're accustomed to making about $2,900 a month, I'm using USD as my prime example, but you are capable of saving 35% of your income, well, then you're actually saving $1,015. So in this situation, even though in the US you make more money, you end up saving a little bit less, right? And another example, and that kind of confuses some people, especially when it comes to, I would say, poorer nations where the cost of living is very low. For example, Cambodia. You can save, if you're making $1,500 a month, you could save about 50% of your salary. But 50% of $1,500 is only $750. So at the end of the day, actually, you're saving less, even though your percentage is higher. These are old numbers, I would say closer to 2018 to 2022. All right, but the idea is the same. The website I recommended last time, I'll put it in the description again. If you want to do a cost of living comparison yourself. Currency stability. Ooh, this is one I had not taken into consideration as extensively because most currencies are somewhat stable. If they fluctuate, it's no more than 10 to 15% annually, gain or loss. So what ends up happening is, well, by the end of the day, it balances out. But sometimes, and this literally happened to me, I was in Turkey when the currency evaluation was 1 USD to approximately 5.6 Turkish lira. During the time that I was there, I was applying for jobs and I did have work. And the issue was, okay, what am I getting paid in? They asked me, I didn't ask them. And I was like, well, whatever. And they're like, well, we need to know because your pay scale will depend on if you want to get paid in USD or if you want to get paid in Turkish lira. I was like, okay, well, which one is higher? And they were like, of course, Turkish lira. I was like, okay, cool. So I accepted Turkish lira. I ended up having to leave that position 3 months later because during that 3 month period, it went from 5.6 to 7.3 to 12 point something. So basically, my income had, or standard of living, and what I could actually do with the income and set salary that I had diminished by approximately 50%. So imagine your rent is still the same, your everything actually gets more expensive because now instead of 5 Turkish lira for a coffee, it's 12 Turkish lira. But my salary hasn't increased. Now there are certain companies that will offer you stipulations that allow you to do a matching thing where they'll increase the percentage according to the inflation, but that's extremely rare. Typically, what they will end up doing in that situation for countries that have extremely unstable economies, you want to get paid in a specific foreign currency, be it USD, Australian dollars, or Canadian dollars, or basically any of the dollars. Or you can do euros, but unless you're European, I highly doubt that that's the way you want to go. Hidden deductions. Oh, this one is quite interesting. It is important to know what your tax rate is, and if you have to contribute to pension and what percentage that is. A lot of times the percentage is very low, it's less than 1 or 2%, so it doesn't really impact you that much. But some pensions are actually advantageous in the long run because while you're there, it's almost like having a savings account that you can leave your money there. And when you're ready to leave the country, you can just withdraw it and you would have earned something. Unless you have specific expenses or unless you have specific bills or things you need to take care of, personally, I agree with it. You do need to find out how difficult it is to withdraw that. Because, for example, I still have approximately 180,000 RMB in China in my pension fund. Now, technically, I can just leave it there until I'm ready to retire and I can go and collect it, which is basically the point it's at. While on the other hand, you might want to withdraw it because you don't have an intention of ever returning there, because some countries it becomes nearly impossible to withdraw it once you have exited the country. Some countries also give incentives to employers to do a matching thing, like what happens in the US. That's always a plus. But again, this is your personal preference. I'm currently in Malaysia and I have worked at companies that do have matching, while I've worked at companies that do not. And it's because of my saving ability and my frugality that I can actually handle it. So the one where they were matching, I was contributing to my pension fund about 23% of my salary, while the one that wasn't, I was only contributing about 11%. And that's because, well, it's not worth as much when you just have to put your own money and there's no contribution from their side. Another thing is about taxes. So again, I'm going to use Malaysia as a prime example. It can get confusing for some people. So they have the $182 day policy, which is basically your tax is doubled if you are in the country for less than 182 days. That includes the from the time you arrive and at the end of your departure. So, for example, if you take a job and you start in August, then you are going to be on the 30% tax rate because the average income tax here in Malaysia is about 15 to 16%. And if you end up leaving before, let's say, June of the following year, you will continue to be on that 30% tax rate and you will not get any deductions. And that is 30% of your salary that you will not see any direct benefit from. So, something that I did, which is I entered the country before the 182 days began, before my contract even began, just so that I would make sure that I would get that additional 15% and not have any issues with it. There are people who will tell you, well, you can, before you exit, you can go and you can apply to get that 15% difference paid back to you. Sure, good luck. Bureaucracy is not fun. I know people who've been waiting years and they still haven't received theirs. And that's because, well, the government asked for extra paperwork, but they had already moved on to another country. And so, unless they come back and they deal with it then in person, or they have the time or energy to deal with it, most of the time it's just money gone. So, my recommendation is always look into what that is and make sure you know what your take home salary is. A lot of sneaky, tricky companies will go and try to tell you, oh, yeah, this is your salary. And you look at it and you're like, wow, that's really good, and they don't mention anything else. And then you get there and you get your first month's pay and you're like, wait a second, where did half of my money go? I didn't even do anything, right? So you need to know what your actual take home pay is. I know a lot of Americans aren't used to this. When you guys go to the supermarket and you see the price and you're used to getting up to the checkout and it's a different price than what you saw because of taxes and all this other stuff. But the reality is that's not how you should arrange yourself before you leave to go accept an offer. All right. Another thing is bonuses. Is there a completion bonus for finishing the contract? That is kind of key. You need to be very weary of this. I fell for this, which is the initial offer they sent me was the annual pay. What I didn't know at the time was a portion of that was considered a contract completion bonus. So guess what happens if you, for any reason whatsoever, do not complete the contract or you don't want to renew? You miss out on that, right? Also, that means that your monthly income is not as high. So, for example, if it's supposed to be $120,000 a year, and you're like, oh, great. So that means I'm making $10,000 a month. Right. But are they calculating it on a 12-month pay scale, or are they calculating it on a 13-month pay scale? Because if they're calculating it on a 13-month pay scale, well, then that means your salary just dropped from 10 down to 8. Now, I don't make anywhere near that for anybody who's watching. I wish I did, but I don't. But yeah, these are things you need to be aware of. Also, is their offer based on unachievable goals? So I've heard this a lot about Korean schools where they set your pay scale at a lower amount, and then there are achievement goals based on what your students are capable of doing. Well, are you willing to risk that bonus? Are you willing to risk that income based on students you don't know who they are? No matter what your background is, no matter what your situation is, unless you know the school is a reputable school that has a high standard of entry, right? If they're just letting anybody in, then don't be surprised when half your students fail and then your paycheck is 30% less, right? So you need to do some research. I'm not even joking. I literally flew out to see this school in person, right? And they paid for my hotel stay while I was there because they were so shocked. They were like, nobody ever does this. Who comes and checks out the school before willing to accept an offer? And I said, I do. At the time, I was living in Shanghai, so it wasn't that expensive of a flight. But I did that. I flew out there and they paid for my 3 day stay. And at the end of the day, I did a few things. I asked some of the other staff members. The principal basically stayed with me the entire time, trying to make sure that I didn't get too friendly with people and find out the truth. But the truth was, yeah, it was a horrible situation. Every single month, people were having unstable paychecks because it was so dependent on their students' outcome. There were a bunch of other issues. Anyways, I'll move on. As I said, are the performance bonuses realistic or just a maybe? I use the example for education, but same goes for engineering. If you are in the mechanical field, because I know some people here in Malaysia, they get hired to come and work for the automotive industry. Are you willing to bet your salary on the people's output? Well, maybe if you have the data, you can check, you can see what their output is, you can compare, then that's fine. But if that information isn't provided to you or that information isn't public, well, then, you're risking a lot on the line for that. Next one, paid leave. How many holidays and sick days are you guaranteed? The reason I say guaranteed is because what is in the contract does not guarantee anything. What you need to check is the local law. We literally had this issue. Our contracts said 5 days, but then HR, the day before she quit or got fired, I have no idea because it was the final email she sent us before she disappeared. She sent us an email letting us know that by Malaysian law, we got 14 paid sick day leaves, no matter what the company said. Now, that caused chaos, to be honest with you. And I kind of understand why the school didn't want to inform people of that because that meant they were more likely to take unnecessary paid sick pay leave. When you work in education, taking a day off, it doesn't affect just you. It affects the kids. It affects everybody. It affects your coworkers. So there's a lot behind it. But I don't think they should have lied about it. I will tell you something that when I was in Shanghai, I was able to convince the management of doing, which was compensation in place of unused sick pay leave. Now, some people argue against that. They'll say, well, no, you shouldn't be going to work if you're sick. I agree. You shouldn't be going to work if you're sick. But Should you be skipping work just because you have a slight headache that morning that most likely once you get into work and you get settled in, or what responsibilities you have for that day, as long as your job will not impact anybody else's life or health or well-being, then there's an issue to that. So I was able to convince them of that, and so they ended up sending it out that for every 5 days of unused sick pay leave, that we would actually receive compensation for it. And since we received, I believe it's 15 sick paid leave days, if you didn't use any by the end of the school year, you basically got 3/4 of a month's salary. Again, this all depends on the country. If you're taking a job in a country that cares about labor rights, they're more prone to having better regulations for that. If you go to a country in the Gulf or Singapore, where they don't care so much about laborers and they're more concerned about the company making a profit because that's where a good portion of the taxes and services go, well, then, yeah, good luck. Sorry. All right. Benefits. Here you need to choose your battles. For example, insurance, right? What type of insurance? Are we talking health insurance, life insurance, emergency for like surgeries and whatnot, travel insurance? How important are these things to you? If you have a lot of medical conditions, I would say, of course, yes. Another thing you need to find out is if you are on prescription, are you allowed to purchase that prescription, or will you need to bring it all from your home country, and what documents you need to bring with you? These are things you need to find out on your own. Do not bug your employer about it, because if you have to bother them about it, they may retract their initial offer, seeing that you are basically a handful and not worth the trouble. Another thing to consider, some countries actually, even if the company is not offering a very good insurance plan, it doesn't really matter because a doctor's visit is nothing in comparison to your home country. For example, right now my wife is in the US, and if she needs to go see the doctor, it's going to cost anywhere between $120 to $200. While here, if I need to go see a doctor, the situation currently is, it's about 20, maximum $40, depending on the type of specialist, right? So that's something to consider. Is it worth fighting with a company about, no, I want insurance with this premium and this, da da da, all this other stuff? Also, another thing is most insurance, for my Americans out there, do not have deductibles. Insurance covers everything, it insures you. I do not know why we as Americans accept the American health care system the way it is. All right, flights. So used to be, it, it still kind of exists, but it's extremely rare that the company would actually purchase the ticket for you. But that has become less and less common, especially because of visa reliability issues. So when the paperwork was easier, or people were more reliable and everything, companies would offer to just buy the flight for you. They would pay for your shipping, they would pay for everything. And there are certain industries and there are certain positions, usually higher end ones, where the workforce pool is much smaller, where they still do that. But typically nowadays it is reimbursements. So there's two types of reimbursements. There's reimbursement upon arrival, which is definitely the preferred way to go, and there's reimbursement upon completion of contract. Not recommended, because I have heard many horror stories about people who've accepted the reimbursement on completion of contract. They did complete their contract, but then the company made them jump through so many loops that they just ended up leaving. And that was the intent of the employer. The intent of the employer was to make that person just so frustrated that they walked away from this large portion of money. I do not recommend that. And do not accept any position abroad that does not offer anything, be it like they don't offer to purchase a ticket, they don't offer to reimburse a ticket, anything. Do not accept that position. I do not care what your work class is, what your work position is, what your background is, none of that. I do not care if you are a Indian construction worker going to work in Dubai. I do not care if you're a civil engineer from France going to work in Xinjiang, China. It does not matter what you're. where you are from. It does not matter where you are going. Do not accept any position that does not offer some type of flight and relocation compensation. Because once a large portion of people start doing that, companies will no longer offer it. And it puts a lot of risk on you. Too much risk, to be honest with you, because you're talking hundreds, if not thousands of dollars. And that's if you're just going by yourself, if you're not relocating with your entire family, only to not get it. Some companies are only offering partials. And I know that that is the beginning sign of them just not offering it at all. So my recommendation is stick to your guns, know what it's worth to you, what the cost is. If they offer a little bit less, you can always say what I say. You buy me the ticket. Housing or housing allowance. Oof, this one is a little complicated. So, is the housing included? And I believe I already mentioned this in the intro video. I do not recommend you take employment where housing is included, unless you are working in a compound or working on a ship where basically you have to be where they put you because that is a part of your job, that is a part of your employment. That's different. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about more of the higher end positions. It is highly recommended that you take a housing stipend or housing reimbursement or some type of compensation for that. Do not take their word for it. Do not trust whatever they say. It has to be in the contract when it comes to what you will receive. And I highly recommend you do your own research on finding out how much rent is where you are or where you want to stay. There are tons of websites. Every country has their own website. Just Google rent in and then put the city, and most likely the first three pages will be some sponsored for some rental agency, and you can find out approximately how much it will cost you. There's a lot of things to consider in that because you need to consider the deposit, you need to consider how long your contract is, how far you want to be. Some people don't like living close to work, some people like being very close. Like for myself, I literally lived across the street from my job because I didn't want to have to own a vehicle. I didn't want to have to use any type of transportation. I wanted to be able to just get to work and get there early, get home, and get home early type of thing. And I've done that for a good number of years, and I found it's what works for me. But some people want to separate their work environment and running into anybody from work from where their personal life is. It's just a personal preference. And if your company says, "Oh yeah, so we're offering $700 a month for rent," and that's because that's the average rental price in our area, do your research. Trust me, it is worth the 15 minutes of research to find out how much rent actually is, because for my situation, I pushed for it and it was definitely worth it every single time I've done that. Um, some places they'll just say, well, this is what we're offering and you have to accept it. And that is, again, a personal choice. Um, but at the end of the day, your largest expense while you are living abroad will typically be your rent. It can be anywhere from 25 to 75% of your income. Yes, you heard that correctly. I was in Qatar and I found a decent apartment and it was nice and furnished and in the expat neighborhood. And I was making the equivalent of about $4,000 to $5,000 a month, and my rent was somewhere around 2,800 without expenses. So yeah, you really need to take that into consideration. And I believe this is almost the last section, the length of your contract. So typically it is 2 years, but there are, of course, 1 year contracts and seasonal, which is becoming a lot more prevalent for different reasons. Some of it is because of how visa regulations are working and how a lot of companies are getting away with just not having to do visa paperwork because that means they have to do a lot of extra paperwork with the government. I will not, have not ever promoted working illegally. There is a gray line between taking on extra work on top of your regular work. But my recommendation is if you're going to move that far away, just try to find a job that pays enough that you don't need the extra work. Be aware, most seasonal work is illegal. Yep, like I just said. Working out without a work visa or permit leaves you open not only to legal trouble. This one, oh my, I've seen it so many times. It is a horrible situation. Come on your tourist visa and we will flip your visa. And then they don't do it. And they still pay you. But then what ends up happening on your last paycheck, they just don't pay you for it. So what are you going to do? Who are you going to go complain? You're going to go report yourself to the police? You're going to go report yourself to the government, to the labor office? Hi, sorry, I've been here for a year and technically I've been working illegally. You're not going to do that. And if you do, you're going to get in as much trouble, if not more trouble, for breaking the law. And you could actually not, you could basically be fined the sufficient an amount that means you worked for free. I also have some friends who unfortunately got caught up in a situation. This was in Shanghai before they cracked down, and a company that had maybe 20 plus branches got caught doing this, where they had some employees who were fully legitimate and some employees who were working on tourist visas. And because of the way the system is, they shut everybody down, and everybody who handed over their passports couldn't get it until a few months later. So they couldn't even leave the country because you're not allowed to exit unless you have a visa in the first place. So even if they got a new passport, they wouldn't be able to leave. So just be very weary of that, which reminds me about your passport. Your passport is your passport. And anybody who's from a nation who has a strong embassy, your embassy will tell you the same thing. Your is your passport. You have a right to hold on to it at all times. No employer has a right to hold your passport for any given amount of time. Now, at some point, you will have to hand it over while they're doing the visa, but typically that is only for the actual visa process, and it should not take more than 3 to 5 business days. It is not the entire process of the visa. They will fill out the application, how much ever time that takes, and then the government will request for your passport. They will take your passport, either hand it in manually or through the mail. Then they will get it back within 3 to 5 business days, and then that's it. So you should have, if you handed it on a Monday, you should have your passport back by Friday. Any company who tries to hold on to it, I highly recommend, if you are not afraid of any legal trouble, you tell them, give me my passport or I'm going to go report you. Do not play with that, because that is how a lot of people end up getting stuck and basically becoming slaves. And I know I'm saying this video in English, so a good portion of the people that I'm trying to warn about this, maybe the language barrier will not be there, but I'm speaking this at every level. This type of abuse doesn't happen as often with the high end positions. It is more common with the low end positions. I've heard a lot of horror stories with labor jobs. Okay. Do not sign a contract that is more than 2 years, no matter how enticing it is. You do not know what the global market is. You do not know what your life position is. You don't know what's going on. Even if it's a contract renewal, I do not recommend signing a contract more than 2 years, but it's extremely rare nowadays. It used to be they did that to hold on to specific people because they held high positions or they had a lot of background knowledge or they had been there for long enough. But at the end of the day, it's just your personal choice. Keep in mind that the law of the land supersedes the contract. Yes, this is something to definitely keep in mind. There are some companies that will offer you a 2 year contract, but actually, the visa application only allows for 1 year. Great. It's good to know that. I'm not saying don't accept the job. I'm saying pay attention. Know what is actually the law of the land. And if you take a seasonal job and work under the table, keep it to yourself while you are there. Again, I do not endorse working illegally, but keep your mouth shut, right? Lastly, this is not about salaries and benefits. This is more of something I want to complain about because I've had to explain this many times. Because when you work in most countries as an expat, you will earn more than the locals. And if you work in a company, which typically you have to work in a company that's mixed, unless you work in a company that's strictly expats, which can happen but is extremely rare, you're going to have resentment towards you as an expat. So you have to be somewhat sympathetic, But what my rant is towards the other side, where they need to be empathetic towards us. Okay. And there's a reason we get paid more, unless you're working in a Gulf nation, in which case the locals actually get paid a ton more than you do, for different reasons, which I won't get into. So here are some reasons. As a local, you can quit your job, change your job as you please. While us as expats, we are bound by by our contract, and we can't change our job if things don't work out. You kind of just are stuck. Work it through, get your contract done, take your money, and you leave. Or you have to break your contract, which can cause you a lot of issues if you want to continue working in that country or finding future employment. Another thing, as expats, we are typically leaving our friends and loved ones to move somewhere that requires a flight to return to them. The flight can cost more than an entire month's salary, especially if you have your family and children, or your spouse and your children with you, and can take days of travel. For example, working here or almost anywhere outside of Western Europe to the US, it will take you more than a day of travel. On average, I think my last few trips to the US with my transit flight, it cost me, or sorry, it took me about 2.5 days to get home. So, for example, Christmas break wasn't even worth going. I never really go home for Christmas break. It just doesn't add up. So that's 5 days round trip, you know. Well, as a local, well, if you're from the same city that you work in, you just get in your car and you go visit your family. Or if you're even if you're from another city, it's still easier for you to just go visit your friends and family whenever you want to on weekends and whatnot. You can just literally leave after work on a Friday, get back Sunday evening. We can't do that as expats, and that has a cost in its own, a stress cost. Lastly, and more importantly, you have legal recourse against your employer. So if they abuse you or take advantage of you, even if it takes years to conclude, well, in our situation, they just cancel our visa, install until we give up, which I have seen and has happened to me, and well, technically, currently is happening to me, where they want you to just get frustrated enough that you just give up and leave. Well, guess what? They don't pull that crap with locals typically. Why? Because they know the local's not going anywhere. That if he's stubborn enough, that he'll make sure that they pay, or that they, um, you know, fulfill their end of the agreement of the contract. That doesn't mean it always happens. There are always crappy companies out there. There are always crappy people out there. But at the end of the day, you have more legal recourse because you are from that country. And that's why, yeah, I'm here. I'm not going to get into it, especially since the thing is still ongoing. But don't give up. If you're out there and you're going through something similar to me, don't give up. Do not let bad employers get away with this type of abuse. Do not let them break the local laws because they think that they are above it, or because they think, well, you're an expat and you're going to give up and you're just going to go, or you're going to end up doing something illegal by working illegally or under the table, and they're just hoping that, you get caught and deported. Don't do any of that. Now, I understand a lot of people do not have the financial capability or the stubbornness to deal with that. But I highly recommend that you do your research beforehand. And in my situation, this is not a hindsight situation. I knew going into my current position that there was issues. And even after, because I'm on a 2-year contract, even after the first year, I had an option where I could have walked away because I knew of those issues and I knew the stress that it was causing me and my family. But I chose to continue, for my own personal reasons. And that is where the issue is. So the issue wasn't so much them as much as I made a bad choice, knowing this. And this is why I'm making this video, not just to remind you guys, but to also remind myself. Do not go through this again. Do your research. And when you find the results of your research, follow through with that decision. Don't just ignore your results. Thanks. Sorry for talking too much. Like, share, subscribe, comment, argue with me, debate with me. I love it. If you've got a different perspective or if you've got a different experience, I'd love to hear about it. And you guys have a great day, afternoon, evening, wherever you are.